Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors. Leaders that you might have never heard of, but in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, decisions they made, and the lessons that they learned along the way.
Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast.
Hi, I'm Tolu, aka The Podfather, and I have the pleasure of hosting What Makes You Tick.
And I am Richard Washington, founder of TickTalent. We're delighted to sponsor this podcast. Tolu, Podfather.
Yes, Richard.
We've got a special episode.
Very special episode. If you follow us, you will notice that we are in person.
This is
today.
not AI. This is real.
This is real. This is real. It's about 18 months of the What Makes You Tick podcast.
Can you imagine?
No, it's crazy, isn't it?
I loved it though, that first episode we did.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really know each other.
No.
We hadn't met in real life.
Nope.
I'd come on your podcast to talk about emotional intelligence and leadership.
Yeah.
And loved the conversation so much. I was like, we have to do something together. And then we had this back and forth. We might publish it in the show notes.
Yeah, I think we
about
should.
like what we might talk about. And we both realised we both loved leadership.
Yeah.
We both loved growing our careers. And we both had a similar story in that we'd been in a company for 12 years.
Yeah, bang on 12 years.
12 years with all these different promotions in between. And so we talked about in that episode a word that's now becoming like core to the identity of TickTalent, which is intrapreneur. So since we started this podcast all those 18 months ago, what have you learned about being an entrepreneur?
As you can imagine, I've had lots of amazing conversations while we've been doing this. And some of the things that come through quite often are curiosity. So all of these people are just really curious and they ask the right questions, and they don't know at the time it's the right questions. They're just being curious, right? Yeah. And it leads them to places that they would have never found before, right? So curiosity is one. Bravery is another one. All of the people we talk to are so brave. You know, some of them are the first people in their families to do a certain thing. Some of them are breaking ground in industries that they would have never thought of. They all take really big, brave decisions that, like I said at the time, they don't always feel like, oh, I'm going to be brave. It's just, this is the next step. Let me do that. And then I think kindness. Like, all these people are amazing. I have such good conversations with them and they're so kind. Yeah. So curiosity, bravery and kindness is something that I've seen quite a lot. Yeah. What about you? What's come through for you?
Like if you like, what's the absence of ego?
Yeah.
These people are ridiculously successful.
Yeah.
And they're working in some of the coolest companies, a lot of which we'd never heard of, and some that we had, but most we hadn't.
Yep.
But they're like ridiculously successful revenue leaders, executives. We've had some founders on, and they're just so down to earth.
Yeah.
And it goes to show, right, there's this theory that anyone that's kind of worked in agency land has, which is you've got like a kind of layer of management inside larger organizations who really like talk down to a lot of people. It's quite hierarchical and it's quite, I don't know what the word is, but they think they're more important than their kind of capability is. There's a bit of arrogance. But all these people are like, they've obviously become so successful because they are the kind of people who get other people bought into their mission. Like they're the kind of natural leaders that people want to be around, which goes to show that actually you can be incredibly successful, but super, super, super down to earth.
I feel like so many of them have had this journey of, this sounds bad, but like being humbled, right? One of the things we talk about is what's a time when something's gone wrong, you know, or what was a situation that you learnt a lot from? And one of the most amazing things is you watch people go back to that moment and you watch them just like remember that moment, remember the feelings and share like, this is what happened, this is how it felt, and this is how I got out of it. Because that story and that journey out of it is where that gold comes from.
And they've all got a way of articulating that bad thing in a really positive way, which is like the total definition of growth mindset, right? They've self-analyzed, looked at what happened. It wasn't like what they wanted, but they've taken meaning from it, which is now going to serve people. And a lot of it's like formed the principles of how they operate as a leader. I love it. I think there's so many, like one of the goals that we had from the podcast was about giving people virtual mentors because going in most companies, you're so like tunnel vision my next step is the manager above me, and then it's senior manager, then it's director, then it's VP, and you just go on this path because it's like all that's in front of you and all the mentors that you have are inside the business. And there's almost this culture in a lot of businesses, which is we're the best in the world at what we do. There are no competition. Just you can have all the career that you want here, and they try and keep people inside businesses. And a lot of time, we're lucky. We worked in businesses that we had a long stretch, not feeling stagnant in roles, but continuing to grow. But honestly, I got promoted too far. I was promoted into a role that gave me incredible knowledge. But if you look at like that definition of how much of my time I was actually spent doing my true strengths, i.e. things that strengthened me, rather than things I was having to learn to try and be okay at, it was probably like 15% of my time was actually spent on my special abilities.
That's so interesting, because I think that I have a slightly different experience in view, because I feel that often what happens is you're really good at sales, for example, right? So because you're really good at sales, you get promoted to the next level.
Yeah.
But you've not been taught this is how you lead at the next level.
Yeah.
It's just you're good at sales. Here's your next thing. I was really like blessed that I had amazing managers for my whole career. People who said, yeah, you're really good at the technical stuff, but here's what you need to do with the people stuff.
Yeah.
Here's how you manage a team. Here's how you lead people, because leadership and management are different. And I feel that that's often the piece that's missing, even in terms of what you're talking about. You might get promoted because you're amazing at what you do, but okay, now I'm at this next level, and what now, right? How do I make my team successful? How do I not give in to the ego? How do I play nicely with others?
Yeah.
All those things I don't think we get taught as part of the growth plan.
Yeah, I agree. But you worked in a massive company, right? With huge amount of resources. So Sky, for anyone who doesn't already know. But like, so they have to have a really structured like HR and people development
That's
process.
the thing, they don't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's what even when you look at massive companies, you will see loads of senior people who are just senior because they were really good at what they did before. And that leadership side is missing. The leaders that I had did that on purpose. It wasn't part of the structured plan. It was just that's who they were, right? I just got really blessed with that I had great people to teach me that. Otherwise, I could have got lost in the whole big corporate thing and become a bit of a arrogant person.
Yeah. It's a funny one. I honestly think that in the company I worked at, they put ridiculous amount of focus into training people at all levels. I was in an 18-month training program to become a director.
Wow.
So they knew that there was all these gaps around like reading P&Ls and doing account management executives. So we actually did formal training processes to go and do all of those things. But I was learning how to do something. And it reminds me a lot of the Devon Hennig episode that we just did, where he talks about, well, if it's not something that you love, there's a difference between pushing yourself outside your comfort zone versus forcing yourself to do something that you don't love.
Interesting.
And genuinely, I spent probably 85% of my time doing things that I didn't love.
But most people don't love reading a P&L, to be fair, right?
No. Some people. It depends
Accountants do, but
if it's green.
Yeah.
Red ones are bad. But I think it's amazing. The people that we've met, and what I really love about it is, and we've been quite deliberate in trying to do it this way, we've had all different types of guests. So we've had the kind of classic, very successful salespersons become a sales leader, become a CRO, and then we've had people who like started as DJs. Like, what are some of your favorite like non-traditional, non-conventional paths that we've heard of from the pod?
So I think I'm not going to name it in case I get it wrong, but someone started as a scientist.
Yeah.
And that was one of my things that was just like, what? You started as a scientist and then you end up, and she killed it in sales.
It's Randy Sue.
It is Randy Sue. I thought it was Randy Sue. Sorry, Randy Sue. But she started off as a scientist and she just smashed it in sales from like the moment she switched. Yeah. And that was probably one of my like, whoa, that's really different.
Yeah. I actually saw she did a LinkedIn post the other day or a video, and she talked about she's been describing that as this kind of like unconventional path for a whole career. And someone said, actually, it doesn't make you unconventional. It makes you a unicorn. The fact that you've got all this knowledge of a different part of the business that you've then brought into sales. And I was like, that's a really cool way of describing it. But again, someone who, through a growth mindset, has been talking about, I'm different for this, but actually going, this is a very unique set of capabilities. There's all these incredible stories, right? Just such cool people. I've absolutely loved it. Who have been... I won't ask you who's been your favourite guests.
They're
it's
all
impossible. But what are some of those standout moments that you've had?
Do you know what? So it's so easy to forget because we've done like 60 plus episodes, right? So it's so easy to forget some of the earlier things. But I met someone when I was in Prague, and they were Mexican, right? And I was telling them about Felipe, right? And I was like, Felipe, of course. Like, that was one of our really early episodes, right? And just hearing his journey with his dad and, you know, stuff like that and how that's formed him. I love when I hear from our guests how things in their childhood, not to be too Stevie Bartlett about it, but how things in their childhood have kind of shaped them into who they are, and how, you know, watching his dad be like this international global businessman really shaped his approach to work and to a career. And there are just so many amazing different threads and different stories that we've got to be a part of. Yeah,
absolutely. And Sergio Chabot,
yeah.
who's now got his own big podcast.
Does he?
Called I can't even say it. Mexpreneurs.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
I know, right? He's going to come on soon and do an episode where we talk about entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Because he's really fascinated by this whole entrepreneur thing.
Yes.
But do you remember in that first episode, we talked about why we were focusing
on
not
entrepreneurs.
On entrepreneurs and not on celebrity. But we were going to talk about entrepreneurs. Do you remember why we talked about it? Why was that important?
I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I talk to people about this often, is that sometimes when you watch some of those big podcasts and you watch the big entrepreneurs, you feel like that's so far away from you. And like, well, okay, of course, like this famous person has all this time and all this money to do this, but I'm just here in my 9-to-5 job. And what we wanted to give people was stories of people that were like, just like them, you know, people who are entrepreneurs in companies, but building amazing careers and showing exactly how you can do the same thing. Because, you know, what % of people are actually entrepreneurs? It's not that high, right?
Really low. Really low. It takes like a special kind of crazy to take the level of risk to start a business.
Says the entrepreneur.
It's been stressful. Do you know what though? Even though I have my own business, I still feel like an entrepreneur because it's a service business.
Okay.
So we support clients to find entrepreneurial executives, managers and sellers for early stage tech companies.
Interesting.
So I work like I'm in the company.
Yes.
It's like that kind of classic agency model. We're part of an extension of your team.
Yes.
I genuinely feel like that. So I still feel like I have bosses.
Interesting.
And I still feel like I'm working towards someone's cause.
Okay.
I have the freedom and creativity with my own business to do stuff like this.
Love that.
And to just decide what we spend time on as a business. But when I'm working actually revenue generating, which this podcast is just for the fun, I really feel connected to that business in an entrepreneurial way. But I think these people just don't get any I tell you, here's the reality. So you know that when you were in Sky, in that 12-year career, you're so busy, you don't have time to build your personal brand.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
You know, you just don't have time.
No.
So you speak to all these people. I speak to so many executives who have come out of massive careers, maybe 10 years, and gone, I now need to start posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Where on earth do I start?
Yeah.
And they've not had to think about it.
No.
But the market's harder now. So you have to stand out. You have to be different. You have to sort of have a voice, have an opinion. But they just haven't needed to.
No.
And they may be at 50. And they have never needed to try and do anything in public. So I think making them giving them an opportunity to be a hero, to actually like talk about the lessons that they've learned, the decisions they've made, the bets they took, all that stuff is so human because they're just normal people and they're not being asked to come on podcasts every single week, unless it is to talk about a really specific sales tactic or a specific methodology or framework. No one wants to talk to them as a person. And don't get me wrong, there's been points in this where I've gone, it would be so cool to have like a famous guest. And I still think we might get bigger, more famous, bigger following guests as we grow the podcast. But I almost don't want to go after the massive fish who are already on 50 different podcasts. I love it when we talk to a guest and they're like, this is my first podcast.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And do you know what? Some of my favorite feedback is people like, this feels like therapy.
Yeah.
Right? That's honestly some of my favorite feedback because that's what we wanted it to be, is just to have a nice conversation with people, hear people's stories, amplify their journeys. It's amazing. And I think what you said about when you've been in a company for so long, it wasn't until I left that I realized that like my network isn't anywhere near as good as I thought it was, right? Because when you're in a big company, there's like 20 or 30,000 people at Sky. So even just networking in there, you feel like, okay, I know a lot of people. Yeah. But then when I had to leave, I was like, I don't actually know anybody else in my industry. Yeah. Right? Like it was very sobering. So I can't imagine doing that when you're 50 years old.
Yeah, imagine. But so I worked in a business that grew to 450 people. Okay. And I was a director of the global HQ.
Okay.
Sounds really powerful, right? But it was a 450 person business.
Okay.
So I did know everyone. Yes. I was on all the e-learnings. When I'd go places, people were like, oh, I feel like I know you. But then when I left through redundancy, I stepped into this big wide world and I felt totally lost and insignificant.
Yeah.
You just did a TEDx talk, Tolu.
Can't believe you put that in there.
I have to talk about it's the coolest thing in the world. And then a few people I saw in the feedback talked about you talking about being a big fish in a small pond, and then please fill us in.
So it was basically about don't just stay in environments where you're the big fish in a small pond, but actively look for environments where you feel like or you are the small fish in the ocean. Because if you think about exposure, if you're the biggest fish, everybody's getting exposed to you and what you know and what you can do. But when you're the small fish, you're looking up at all the bigger fish and saying, oh wow, that one can do this and this one can do this. And it gives you so much more exposure to things that can help you to grow.
Yeah, but why not big pond? So you changed it to ocean.
Because most ponds are man-made, right? And they're stagnant water. Oceans are fresh water. There's things in the bottom of the ocean that we can never even see. The possibilities are endless for the ocean. So that's why I chose the ocean instead of a big pond.
Yeah, I love it. And we've kind of taken this podcast from that very crudely recorded episode 18 months ago to now this like epically professional thing that I'm sure in 18 months time we'll still look back on and go, we didn't really know what we were talking about. So we're on a bit of a journey, but we're taking people on the journey with us and I absolutely love it. What do you hope comes true in the next 18 months?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think just lots more amazing conversations, because that's one side. But then I think the impact is really the other side. So I always love when I hear from people who have said, oh, this person, this was the feedback that they gave me about the episode. So yeah, just impact for our guests and also impact for our listeners. What about you? What do you hope for it?
Yeah, I think that it's like trying to take all the value that we're learning from people, because they're telling us their whole career stories in an hour. And then how do we package up some of that into really useful ways for people?
Love that.
So we've invested in an editor now. So we're getting like proper, our content's going out, flooding the internet. We're spreading our surface area of luck.
Love
Again,
that.
to quote Devon.
Love that.
So if we can be in a position where we've maybe taken some of the best ideas that people have had across the Making Revenue Tick Masterclass series, as well as the What Makes You Tick series, and maybe creating more assets, cheat sheets, more guides, more ebooks, so that people can find content in ways that they can digest just in time, rather than having to go and watch the full episode. I think that would be really, really cool. More bite-sized versions of the brilliance.
Love that.
And then, like you say, just being in a position where we know another 60 incredible leaders around the world, because every time we have these conversations and I listen back to those episodes on my runs, I genuinely love our podcast. I think it's the coolest thing on the internet. You've got like high performance is my like mecca. That's my top one. Okay. But then I think we're just behind it.
Love that.
And I just think that if we can continue to produce stuff that we love, then there's a really good chance that some other people, those 3 listeners that we've got, might enjoy it too.
Awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. So we'll do it again in 18 months, right?
Maybe sooner.
Amazing.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of What Makes You Tick, and we will catch you on the next episode. Thanks so much for joining us for the What Makes You Tick podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much value in hearing other people's career stories. And if you're someone focused on growing in your own career, check out our Growth Magnet newsletter on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And we will see you on the next episode.